You're listening to the Business Builders Book Club, helping you bridge the gap between knowledge and action. Whether it's an old classic or just hit the shelves, we've got you covered. Follow along with us and remember, information only becomes wisdom after it's applied.
All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is the Business Builders Book Club, episode 1. Today we're covering 3 simple steps. This is part 1 of 3 parts we're going to do. And today we have Jacob Manishevitz on to talk about this book. This is his recommendation. So Jacob, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Russell, for having me. I'm very excited to chat about this book. It's had a pretty big influence on the beginning of my career. I'm a mortgage agent in downtown Toronto, and I'm licensed to fund anywhere in the province. I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, people looking for renewals on their mortgage for a lower rate or refinances as well. And I'm very excited, like I said, to chat about this book. I'm very excited for your series. This is really cool what you're doing, and I have a lot to share about it, and lots to share about further reading as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So, like we said, 3 simple steps. How did you find out about this book in the first place? Like, who sort of got you hip to it?
Yeah, the leadership at my brokerage, actually, my principal broker and my VP of sales are both big proponents of personal development, and it parallels business development as well. And they're big believers that you work on yourself from the inside, and that creates success on the outside as well. And you can't be successful in business unless you're successful personally and psychologically and health wise as well. And they actually, my principal broker bought me this book, with a nice inscription on the inside of the cover, and it really kind of started my personal development journey. And I think it's a great place to really start it. It builds a good platform and makes you very well rounded in the on the different aspects of personal and professional development as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's kind of cool that it's a launch pad for you. It's also going to be the launch pad for this podcast as we start to get into it. I love the little detail you put in there that it's something that you've put into practice in your life and your business, right? Because the whole concept for this podcast is, I find with myself, like I'll read a book and then maybe I won't implement all the things that I could implement from it, right? So I think that the idea of this is to get in there, get into the dirt of the book and like really pull out what's most valuable from it, and then find ways to take some sort of actionable steps to be able to actually make the things that are most consequential in the book affect your life in the most ways. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this book is great for that as well, because it is 3 simple steps. It's 3 actionable steps, and you can take them one at a time. You can go all in and go try and hit all 3 of them at the same time. But it's very much for beginners as well. If you're just starting the journey of personal development and kind of don't know where to start, whether you think you want to do some journaling and maybe some meditation, but you also want to have some more real life situational kind of practices, it really hits all those points, and it's a great place to start, in my opinion. Beautiful. Yeah, well, this is 3 simple steps. It's by Trevor Blake. So why don't we get into a little bit? We can talk about this first section. And for those of you who haven't listened before, which is everyone, this first episode, the way this is going to work is we're going to have this split up into, I think, 3 different episodes for this book so that we can really get into it. And each week we're going to sort of talk about the main ideas from that section of the book. And we're going to talk about ways that you and also we can implement these ideas into our business and some sort of tracking system to do that for the next week, so that the next time we talk, we can see like, hey, have we been able to add even more of this into our business? For me, add this at all, right? Because it's the first time I've read the book, but maybe for you, there'll be some concepts that the first time you read it maybe didn't resonate as much, and now they might make a bigger difference.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. That's another great point as well. I mean, this book is the kind of thing that you can read multiple times, and every time you read it, you get more out of it. And there's, little tidbits that you missed the first time, or something that you can build on the practices that you implemented the first time around as well.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think that's sort of the hallmark of a good book, right? That you can go in there time and time again and always pull something different out of it.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this first section of 3 simple steps, I think a way to sort of sum it up is that it's about reclaiming your mentality, right? Like it talks about this concept of quicksand and how in life at times it can feel like you're in the quicksand, and it's that feeling of wanting to take control of our own destinies, but not really having the resources to do that. Would you say that's kind of what this first section is touching on most?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the quicksand also refers to a lot of external influences that we experience on a day-to-day basis, especially in such a media focused and consumer focused society that we live in. These external factors can kind of drag us in certain directions without us knowing it. And I think that's kind of where the quicksand metaphor also comes into play for sure. But yeah, reclaiming your mentality, it's definitely the thesis of the first section of the book.
Yeah, like talking about how these different influences can pull you in different ways, and maybe you don't have the most control over your life if you're allowing these external factors to really make those decisions for you, right?
Definitely. And it's about opening your eyes to the fact that you are influenced by these things. Because I think a lot of us go through life not realizing how influential, certain external factors are on our psyche and our cognitive ability as well. And it's just kind of about shielding yourself, but also being able to be open to growing in the positive directions, regardless of what these external factors are kind of how they are playing on your inner and outer um, abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll get even more into some of those points in more detail as we get going here. But I found it interesting because this is one of those books where he kind of leans on storytelling to make his point. And
Definitely.
then he'll go
There's
into
a big first section that's a long story, and it gets you acclimatized to like his perspective, right? And you can see where he's coming from. And when I first got into it, it kind of seemed a little bit out of place. Like I thought, is this just a book about a story about his mom or himself or something like that? But it plays an important role in setting the stage for the rest of the section, I think.
Yeah, so the story's about his mom, right? And I think the gist of it is that his mom gets diagnosed with cancer, and they say, "Hey, like you only have 6 months to live," and she sort of takes the approach to that diagnosis that she's gonna fight it and doesn't even want to hear it, right? Yeah, and so he talks about how he thinks this mindset is what kind of allowed her to live for so long and be able to raise her kids, which they said she wouldn't be able to do, and be able to be there as her kids went off and got married and did these things.
Yeah, and I think it's a really it caters to a bigger point, and even a larger thing that maybe even not be addressed in the entire book, but the fact that we create our own reality with our mental space, right? And the fact that she denied the diagnosis, so to speak, it changed her reality, right? It changed her situation completely, and that's a whole other topic, and there's lots of other reading that we could do on that. But yeah, and that's something that I've dived into as well. Is using your mental power to create your own reality, and how powerful that can actually be.
Yeah, because like, who's to say like what is real and what is not real for any given person, right? Because the way we experience the world is so different from person to person based on and a huge amount of things, like how they were raised, our opinions about things, our biases, right? So I think there's definitely some truth in the fact that you can sort of take control of this thing that otherwise you just have innately, but take control of it and shape it so that it's going to benefit you long term.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's a powerful story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it ends, and she ends up passing away after, I think, 14 years after she was supposed to, right? And it's talking about her funeral and how there were all these people there that the family didn't even know she had any effect on, like telling stories about how she heard of this girl in the community who was going to school and didn't have any clothes, like that, like the kids would make fun of her, so she like went out and helped her get clothes that actually fit her. And it's like, it really made me think, like, how are people going to remember me, and how do you want somebody to remember you after you're gone, right? Like, what kind of positive impact can we have on the people around us by creating this mentality that allows us to interact with people in that way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this part of her life that was supposed to be short and sad and painful turned out to be the most, positive and influential part of her life. So yeah, it's definitely amazing what the power of thought can do in that respect.
Exactly, yeah. So they take it from this story where it's kind of abstract. It's not telling you any sort of actionable steps to make these changes, and they go into sort of talking about a formula for controlling your reaction. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple things that stuck with me, and from reading and rereading, I'm sure we'll be able to, you can pull more points out of it. But the main ones really that stuck with me were the part about shielding yourself. So he talks about a metaphor about putting, the way I envision it is kind of a glass case around yourself. When people are like growing plants in the garden and they're very young, they put a big jar over top of it
Right.
to protect it from squirrels, or I don't know. That's how I envisioned it myself when he described it in the book. And it's before, you go out into the wild, into society every day. You kind of put this shielding over yourself, and you envision it deflecting all of the negativity. So all of the harsh advertisements and the negativity we see on the news and tabloids and that kind of thing. It's this shield that really protects yourself, so you don't allow any of that stuff to get in. So that was definitely one of the biggest takeaways for me from that part, and a very influential metaphor, I guess, that he used there. And the other biggest thing was not putting yourself in a situation where, or removing yourself from a situation where you're experiencing negativity via somebody complaining, a coworker complaining, or somebody that you run into at the grocery store, who's having a bad day, or maybe they're just, perpetually an angry person, or whatever the case is. How you remove yourself from that and put positive spin on it. And I guess one more thing would be the negativity coming out of yourself. We're all very conditioned to complain about everything. So for example, my condo is too small is something that I would complain about a lot if I was if my mentality was shifted in that direction. But I've worked on myself to the point where when I see a thought like that coming up, I'm trying to exercise in my condo, and I keep hitting the wall because it's too small. Right. I spin it, and you say something like, I'm so excited for when I have a big house that I get to live in. So it's taking that negative thought that starts to bubble up, and you not that you press it down, but you spin it and you let it out in a different direction, in a positive direction. You talk about what you want to see and what your intentions are. When intentions is something that comes back later in the book, which is very important as well. But yeah, like I said, it takes that negativity and spins it into something positive, and therefore creates a positive reality around yourself.
Yeah, and I think he gets very very practical about it, like saying that he truly believes that what you think about and the thoughts that you sort of put out there will be represented in your future and what comes to you, right? Like the more negativity or negative thoughts that you're thinking in a day, that's just going to amplify that negative aspect of your life. Have you found that to be the case, that this sort of abstract concept actually can manifest itself in some sort of physical reality?
It's a good question. And it's another one of those bigger topics. There's a book called The Secret, and there's a book called The Power of Now that I got into afterwards, that are a lot about the law of attraction, which is kind of the rule that describes the fact that what you put out there is what the universe is going to send back to you. So you put negativity out, you're going to get negativity back. The same thing with positivity. And it's hard to definitively say that it works, and that it's just like there's a set formula, and that you do this and this happens, or you do this and this happens. But I can tell you that in a year and a half of growing myself and practicing this stuff, my life is completely different. Like I'm on a totally different trajectory than I was before I became a mortgage agent. And I'm sure that no matter what business I decided to go into, I would be on that same trajectory as long as I implemented these kinds of practices. And one of the greatest things about this book as well is that it's not just for business development, it's also for personal development. So, if you put these tidbits into practice, it's both your personal and professional life that will be on that same trajectory together. So going back to your question, it's not really it's hard to say, like, would I be where I am now if I didn't do any of this? I'd say probably not. I'd say I'd probably have fewer clients. I'd probably be less happy with where I am, emotionally and psychologically and that kind of thing. But who's to really say?
Yeah. So
But you have to believe in it. You have to 100% commit to the practice. And then once you get, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road of bringing this practice in, you're not even going to think about the fact that, well, if I didn't do it, where would I be? You're just going to be so ecstatic with where you are and the ability that you've perfected your ability to create your own reality, that it's not really going to make a difference to you whether it works or not, because for you it works, and that's really what's important.
Yeah, so you're clearly a big proponent of this, like, just do it and you'll see your own results, like, as they happen, right? Because I think some people, when they get into this sort of self-development realm of books, there's a certain sect of people that are like hesitant to get into that because they think like, oh, can my thinking really make that big of a difference, or is this really relevant to the goals that I have in my business and in my life, to sort of set this time aside. But what you're saying is that just do it and you'll see the results down the road, right?
Yeah, you have to commit to it. You have to be 100% committed. If you're skeptical, the universe is going to see that you're skeptical and not give you 100% of the returns. Maybe they'll only give you 50% of the returns because you're only 50% committed, that kind of thing. So really it's you just got to dive in and give it a go. And I can guarantee that you'll see some kind of difference. And whether that's just you equating those developments with your practices, or whether those developments would have happened on their own, is really neither here nor there at that point, in my opinion anyways.
Yeah, I think you're right. And to the people that are sort of hesitant to get in, like, what are you really risking by adopting this mindset, right? Like, say you try to have this more positivity in your life and you have all these negative thoughts like sort of pushed out of your life. How is that going to do anything negative for you? Like, even if it doesn't make it so that your business is hugely successful, and like, what's the worst case scenario that's going to happen from you really adopting this, right?
Exactly. You're going to be healthier inside and out, guaranteed. At the very least, you're going to live a couple of years longer. If it doesn't help your business, that's really up to you, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I think you're right. So that sort of covers like the situation, right? Like we're controlling the thoughts that we have about situations that are happening, and that sort of results in our reaction in our day-to-day lives, right? So we can control it by changing our thoughts. But there's also a section in here that's talking about controlling the situations that we find ourselves in. And you touched on this a little bit when you talked about like the news we consume, the people we're around. But are there, at least in your experience, are there any tips that really can help you like get a leg up when you start to sort of consider what situations you're putting yourself into?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely look at your work life. I mean, a lot of us who are owning our own companies, or business for self and sole proprietors and that kind of thing, we don't usually work in an office 9 to 5 with the same amount of people every day. It could be different for different people, but for example, before, when I was a server at a restaurant, I would work with the same people all the time, and these people usually would complain a lot. And so if you look at certain sections of your life like that, maybe there's certain family members that you're around. I'm fortunate enough that my family are extremely positive people, but I'm sure there's people out there who have family members that can be a bit of a downer sometimes. So, between work and family, we can definitely keep our eyes open for situations where we could remove ourselves politely from. And I know he uses that phrase in the book. You don't have to tell people like, oh, you're being a negative Nelly and I'm out of here kind of thing. You don't have to be like that. You can just, politely excuse yourself from the situation. So there's ways to go about it like that. And not as it relates to interpersonal relations, but for example, when you're in line at the grocery store and you have the tabloid magazines, right next to you, and you can't help but look at what's happening with the royal family or what's happening with, movie stars and that kind of thing. just don't look at the headlines. Like that's something that I'm still working on, because it's so difficult. And I don't know what they do with those magazines, but it just draws you in. You have to look at it. You
They're
have to
masters of their craft of like just like getting something
crazy,
clickbaity title. It's just gets you so honed in on it.
Yeah, and you want to pick it up and you want to quickly flip through that article while you're waiting in line. And so you really got to work on not getting drawn in by that kind of thing. And the other big thing for me is seeing the news on TV. Some restaurants or lobbies, that kind of stuff, they have CP24 on the television. It's tough to not look at that stuff, and you'll find yourself looking at it, and then it goes through all of its newsreels, and then it starts from the beginning again, and you're like, man, I've watched this whole thing once. You're
still watching,
and you're still watching. It's got the weather on one side, and then it's got the backup on the DVP underneath that, and I just gotta not. You got to look away, because it's really 80% of it is negativity. And every once in a while you'll see a blurb about the latest thing some companies donated to charity, which is fantastic, but the majority of it is stuff that impacts you on a negative level and forces you into a situation where you might make decisions based on negative influences. And one thing, so those are kind of two, the tabloids and the CP24 are really two like practical situations that we all find ourselves in, at some point during our week, that we can really kind of work on from square one to remove ourselves from that situation. And a good strategy that I like to use when I'm doing that is to have a mantra or a happy place that you can divert to when you're in that kind of situation. So something that you say to yourself that's very positive and healthy and uplifting, or just a situation that you go to in your head where you're happy, whether it's on the beach with a margarita, or whatever your happy place is, right? You can just go there and escape from what's going on, so you immediately counteract that negativity that's being pressed in on you with something positive, and you turn it around.
And it's okay that it's sort of this artificial sort of creation in your mind, because like this is the thing that I, at least in this first third of the book, it seems like they're really trying to hammer home, is that your thoughts are your reality, right? So like if you see this awful picture on the news, right, like you might think like, hey, that's not me, that's not having an effect on me, but it's something that's coming, like being drawn into you, and then you think about it, or you even just see that image, and instantly that sort of thought goes out there, and maybe that's going to come back into your life in some way, like just that little bit of negativity. So
for sure, yeah. And that negative image can be what you portray your world as, right? You see pictures of some war-torn part of the world, and all of a sudden your perception of the world changes to, our world is completely war-torn. Whereas, it's not necessarily creating an immediate impact on you, but it's just how you view the world. And that's how, in the end, your world it exists as war-torn, as opposed to, a nice beach.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the story that Trevor Blake tells in this first section about being in a hotel lobby having a drink with his buddy, right? He's there, and like they're having a conversation, but every once in a while he notices his friend's eyes, they like flick up every once in a while, and he's like obviously like watching the CP24, like the newsreel, like the ticker going by, and then at some point, like his friends like, oh man, look at that, like look at the state of the world, like everyone hates each other, like this is awful, look at all these horrible things that are happening. And Trevor Blake's like, man, like take your eyes down and like look around this lobby or this like restaurant that we're in. It's like, how many people here do you see fighting or angry or mad at each other? And his friend's like, well, I guess I don't really see any, right? And he's like, okay, now take a second look around. How many people are like laughing, smiling, enjoying time with family? How many people are holding hands out on a first date? All these amazing things, right? So it's like, that is your world, right? Like, why are we creating this artificial world based off of what these news sources are telling us, which may or may not be entirely accurate?
Yeah, exactly. Especially, this day and age, you really have to watch out for what media sources you're paying attention to, and that kind of thing. And especially in the last few months, there's been a lot of things to be wary of that are kind of being forced in our direction. So I think it's even more pertinent these days that we guard our mentalities.
Yeah, especially in this first half of 2020, there's been so much going on. And it's you make your opinions about things based off of what is shown to you and what you specifically read. And I think they get into this specifically in the book. Even is saying you, in order to get control of your mentality, you have to become an individual again. It says like at birth we're individuals, right? We have no impressions of the world, but then we slowly get these biases and build these things into our thinking that have just been given to us. And it says like, hey, like we need to think about the things that we're consuming and create and craft our own individual mentality to make our minds up about these sort of things.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a great point. And more to that is that if you think of, the 15, 20, 25 years that you've been taken out of your individuality, since your birth, it's going to take some time to get back into that state. So, it's going to be a lifelong practice. So, for anybody listening who's thinking about getting into it, don't be hard on yourself. You take it day by day, and some days are good, and some days, you're not able to repel that negativity, and it's okay. Like I'm only a year and a half in, and I'm still an amateur, but I'm, working diligently every day to kind of turn things around, and it can take some time. So I guess my point is, don't be hard on yourself about it.
Yeah, it's a practice like anything else, right? Like you hear these words referring to like to yoga or meditation or even like a medical practice, right? These are things that like you're going to be constantly learning and growing, so you can't be hard on yourself if it's not all there right at the start, right? Like it's sort of something that you have to grow with, or at least that's what it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't happen overnight. And like we said earlier, you got to have that level of commitment towards it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's beautiful. I think that covers most of what was in this first little bit. Do you have any other points in there that you don't think we've touched on?
No, I think that's about it. I'd love to kind of chat about other further reading. Maybe we can do it once we get to the end of the series on this book, and kind of maybe point people in the right direction if they wanted to look into any further books that kind of expand on this topic. But the way the book is divided into these three parts, you can take any one of them individually and expand on that as well. So yeah, I'd love to talk more maybe in a later episode about how we can expand in a different direction, because once you finish this book and we finish all three parts, you kind of have this very good, well-rounded base platform from which to jump off of in whichever kind of direction, whether you're more in the spiritual, you want to grow in a spiritual direction, you want to grow in a interpersonal direction, or maybe you want to grow in a lot more in the business professional direction. There's definitely more reading to be done depending on what your preference is.
Yeah, so like I haven't read the whole book yet, like many of the listeners, right? But this first section seems like this is kind of the more spiritual mentality section of it, and from that there's like this whole branch of other books we can read. Like since we're on this now, like do you have any like favorite books that cover that? I think I've read Power of Now, maybe that, and you mentioned that earlier. Is that sort of like the go-to for you for this sort of topic?
I mean, I just finished it about a week ago, and it's good. There are a couple things that I have issues with, and you'll find like as you start to develop a sense for personal development, you'll be able to kind of nitpick at other people's ideas and be like, I don't know about this. But again, you kind of just got to dive in and try it all. The Power of Now is good, but I would recommend The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. There was a movie. I didn't watch the movie. I wouldn't recommend watching the movie. I would read the book.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. It's really a compilation of interviews that she did with a lot of influential people in the personal, spiritual. There's a little bit of a religious aspect in there as well. But what I like about it is that it's very practical. And she talks about the power of attraction, or the law of attraction, rather. And that's really about creating your own reality through your thoughts and actions. And so it's definitely an expansion on the first part of 3 Simple Steps. So if you're interested in more of the, creating something inside to then create something outside of you, that I would definitely recommend reading The Secret.
Yeah, it seems like it's a sort of a common theme across some other books that I've read also, right? It seems like a lot of people who are building up these businesses focus a lot on their inner development, right? Because that's sort of like a ceiling that's there for how much you can grow in other aspects of your life, right? Like if you work on this one thing that is the ceiling, maybe like your relationships become better, your business becomes better, right? So I think, at least in my opinion, it's a valuable thing to check out.
For sure. And I mean, I can guarantee that anybody that you see as a influencer in your industry, or somebody who you aspire to be like, whether it's on a personal or professional level, has taken these practices into account in some form or another. Because, like you said, there is a ceiling that we have inside of ourselves, and we have to grow that. And I'm not sure how much Trevor Blake uses the verbiage manifest in Three Simple Steps, but that's definitely kind of the verb that I would use to describe this. Creating something inside to create it outside. You manifest it through your thoughts and actions. And yeah, like I said, I think most successful people in this world have used that practice to some extent or another.
Yeah, and it's interesting to talk about just the word manifest a little bit, because like I think like whether Trevor Blake believes like in manifestation or not, which it seems like he does, it could be a strategic thing to not use manifest as the verbiage for it, because I think that like some people, when they hear that, they're like automatically going to like think like, okay, this is some sort of like spiritual, like airy, not applicable stuff. Yeah. So the fact that he doesn't use it, that I think it could be a strategic sort of thing, like, hey, like this is a way of thinking that doesn't need to be this abstract sort of approach.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, personally, for me, I wouldn't discount any author from using that kind of language, because you should be open to anything. Because even if manifest has a negative connotation to you, you should be open to breaking that negative connotation as well. But that's something that comes with time and practice. And another author that I would look into is Yuval Noah Harari. He's written *Sapiens*, *Homo Deus*, and the one I'm reading right now is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
*Sapiens* is fantastic. I listened to that. It's a big book. It's a big book, but I listened to that on Audible, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, he's a really smart guy, and he really has a handle on kind of our path as a species. Yeah. But from a historical and more political, he's not very spiritual, and he's not personal developmental at all. It's more of a historical and politically oriented read. So if that's kind of your genre of choice, then definitely get into it. But it really helps create a setting for us to think about ourselves as, just as biochemical forms that experience these things, and how that might relate to the law of attraction. You can really help formulate your own opinions on it, but it also helps keep you grounded in the fact that we really have not evolved from the earliest Homo sapiens who were wandering the African savanna with spears and creating fire by clacking two rocks together and that kind of thing. And we think of ourselves as these highly evolved beings, but essentially we're no different than those things were 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000 years ago, because not a lot of evolution can happen in that amount of time. So we also have to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt that we still have this tribal mentality. We still have this need to come together as a group and as a society, whether it is about negative things that we have in common or not. And I know that's something that Trevor Blake touches on in the first part of Three Simple Steps as well, is that we come together as a group around a negative concept. Like we'll get along based on the fact that we all don't like something.
You can bond with somebody so quickly.
Yeah. Exactly. And that goes back to the fact that we're biologically programmed to be in groups of people. We want to stick together because the bears, are dangerous to us, and we can protect ourselves in larger numbers from any kind of predator or, other negative external factors.
And if you group around like we all hate this thing, it could be better for the society as a group. If you're thinking about like a long time ago, right? If there's one person that is constantly causing problems for your small amount of nomadic people, like, and they're hoarding food, or like it could be beneficial for survival of a human to bond together over this hatred towards a person, so that maybe they're exiled, right? So it's like that way of thinking may not be beneficial for us anymore, but it's so ingrained, right? That's why this is so hard to implement.
For sure. You have to grow out of your evolution, but within your lifetime, which seems essentially impossible. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting topic. And yeah, that Sapiens book isn't one we'll have to do another time on here, because the themes that you can see about humanity, and it can teach you so many lessons. And I should go back to it. It's been about a year since I read it. So that's a good one.
Yeah, fantastic. I try and go back and forth between self-development and then more historical narrative or politically oriented books, just so I kind of have that balance between, those two. Those are my favorite things to read about, I guess. So, going back and forth between them kind of gives you a nice balance.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to vary the sort of things you're reading to prevent any sort of burnout, right? You're always excited to like, okay, now I'm going to get back to this thing that I missed because it's been a month or 2 weeks or however long since I've dug into it. Yeah. So to close off this show, we're going to go into this last segment, and it sort of touches on what I talked about at the top of the show, and that's that when you read a book, it's very easy not to implement anything if you don't have some sort of practical steps to take, or some sort of trackable method to actually implement some of the concepts from the book. So I thought we'd take a minute here, Jacob, and we can talk about and sort of come up with some sort of system that we can more heavily implement some of these concepts from this first third of the book into our life for the next week, so that when we come back next week, we can talk a little bit more about how we found it, maybe tweaks that we'd make for the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the number one thing would be just trying to pay more attention to your thoughts and trying to pay more attention to the external influences in your daily life. Okay. So when you're walking down the street, for example, just pay attention to what's coming in and how that's affecting your reaction to that as well. I think that's something that we should have touched on that we didn't, is that your reaction is really what creates your reality as well. And that, our reactions are all emotional based, and they're reactions to external factors that are coming in. So, just think about how you think about your thoughts, and it's a hard practice to get into. Think about how you're feeling just when you're walking down the street or you're waiting in line or something like that. And I think, the blocking out the negativity, so avoiding the tabloids section in the grocery store line and not looking at the CP24 when you're waiting in the lobby or whatever. I think those are very good, things that we encounter almost on a daily basis that, maybe in the next week we can work on, removing ourselves or taking ourselves from that situation into our happy place. But I think it really starts with paying attention to how you're feeling and your thoughts and reactions to external influences. Then if you can kind of master getting into that mindset, then that is a good way to, it's like strengthening a muscle, right? It's just a practice, just like any kind of other mental or physical practice. You're strengthening a muscle so that, you can react stronger and better, and when you're in that situation anytime in the future.
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea. So we're gonna take a look at what we see and how we react to them. What I want to get into is like, how can we like track this throughout the week really clearly? Like, do you think maybe we like take a notebook and then like have it with us for the next week, or some sort of small piece of paper, or maybe even like a document on our phones where we can actually like in the moment write down this thing that we're seeing and how either we didn't succeed in reacting positively to it, or how we did. Do you think that's, or is there any method that comes to mind that you think we can like have something that's concrete that we can look at and track?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at complaining. That's a big thing that we all do all the time without even noticing. And so if you can work on noticing when you complain and maybe write that down, or write down how you spun that complaint into a positive affirmation, then that's a good way to track it as well. And just see, you can look back at the week and see how many times you caught yourself complaining. And then if you go to the next week and you see that you caught yourself complaining less, maybe it's because you're not paying attention as much, or maybe it's because you're actually complaining less. And another strategy that I implemented for a while is that if you live with a partner, you can ask your partner to call you out on your complaints.
Okay.
You know, you can say, hey, just anytime you hear me complaining about something, just tell me I'm being negative. And so it's kind of an indicator. So you also have a second set of eyes on your mentality, so that even if you don't catch yourself doing it, maybe somebody else will. And so that's something that's worked for me in the past as well.
All right. So that sounds good. So that's what I'm going to do for the next week. And you're welcome to join me on this so we can talk about it. I'm going to bring my phone around with me, like I do anyways, right? Like then we don't have to carry a book in our pocket or anything. I'm going to bring my phone around and have either like a Google Doc or I use Google Keep as my notes thing as well. So I'm going to have it on me every single time I notice myself thinking something negative. I'm going to write it down and how I'm going to spin it. And like you said, I'm going to get my girlfriend who I live with, Steph, I'm going to get her to call out every single time I'm complaining about something so that I can notice that.
It works. It's funny how it works. And it also, it kind of influences your partner a little bit as well. And they stop thinking negatively because they want to join in with you. They don't just want to call you out on your complaints, but they also kind of want to join in. And the thing to keep in mind is that when you're spinning something negative, just make sure you're turning it into something positive, not just another negative thing, because that can, like I use the example, I hate how small my condo is. You turn that around until I can't wait until I live in my big, beautiful house. And you say it like it's going to happen, not like if it might happen. So you have to talk about it like it is a reality. And that's something that comes up later in the book as well, which I'm sure we'll get into a lot. But saying something like it already is, or like it's going to be a reality, is much better than saying if or I hope or something.
Right. Like it'll be great on move-in day at my 4,000 square foot mansion or whatever, right?
Excited to move in. Can't wait. There's going to be so much room. I'm going to have a great backyard, like that kind of thing. That's what you want to say. Not like, I hope one day, I'll have a house big enough for all of my stuff that I have. Yeah,
absolutely. I picture myself like having a hard time, like you're saying, like to get your significant other or whoever you're living with, people you're around all the time, to call you out. I feel like the times that I'm complaining, that's like the last thing I want to hear too, right? Like I'll be looking for sympathy or like looking for some sort of soothing about like whatever thing I'm pissed about. But I feel like that's going to be tricky to be like, yeah, I asked you to do this. Like, this is how you need to react so that I can learn how to properly react to these situations and thoughts, right?
For sure. And you'll get better at that as well. And you'll find that you won't go as deep into a negative space. So you won't be so far into the negativity that you'll be angry that somebody's calling you out on it. You could just stop, take a breath and be like, oh, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have been saying this. Let's go, let's say this instead, or let's go and do this instead. So it just keeps you from shifting so far into the negativity that you're always kind of just teetering on that line, and you want to fall back into the positive space at all times. And then eventually you'll just be on the positive side of the fence and you'll never have to worry about it again. But that takes time and practice.
Yeah. And it's like all about shortening that distance, like to the fence, right? Like right now, like, oh, like maybe it's taking me 20 minutes to like get out of this funk that I'm in on this day. But like, as you push this, the goalposts closer together, right? The goal is to get over that. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good project for us for the week. And we'll read this next section, which is the second section in the book. I think depending on the print edition that you have, it could be different pages, but section 2. It's pretty easy to step number 2. Yeah, of the 3 simple steps. There you go. Beautiful. Well, before we finish up here, Jacob, I want to give a chance for you to plug anything that you're doing. I know you're mentioning you might be doing some sort of some live shows or some recordings of your own, or where can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, I think most of my content is probably amalgamated on my Instagram. So I'm at Jacob Mortgage Matchmaker on Instagram. Your Mortgage Matchmaker is my personal branding. So I've been doing, we'll be doing some more IG lives on Instagram. And for people that don't have as much of an Instagram presence, I'll be doing stuff like this where we record a Zoom session and then I'll be posting that on Instagram and probably LinkedIn as well. But yeah, definitely check me out on Instagram. That's kind of where all my content is amalgamated, and you can we can go from there.
Perfect. And you said for the mortgage side of your business, you can do anywhere in Ontario, right? So if anyone listening.
I mean, I can do anywhere in Canada. I have the connections to be able to do that, but personally, I'm licensed in Ontario, and I work the most in the GTA. I do some Hamilton, London, Niagara region as well. But yeah, I can fund anywhere in the province.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, awesome. Well, thanks again so much for coming on the show today, and I guess I'll see you in about a week, and we'll talk about this next section.
Looking forward to it, man. It was a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm so glad that you're open to it. And I'm hoping we can, bring this to other people as well, whoever's interested in it.
Beautiful. All right, I'll talk to you again soon, man.
Sounds good, Russell. Thanks a lot.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Business Builders Book Club, helping you bridge the gap between knowledge and action. Stay tuned and remember, when information becomes action, things start to happen.